Hello and welcome to Get Good. My name is Bruce and I'm not only joined by Magnus today, there is another face on this recording and it is the one and only Richard Gray. Richard, how are you doing?
Not too bad. I've had to skip my workout just to be here for you. So,
Damn. Okay, right. So we're taking you away from the gun show. So that's pretty
yeah.
important. Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. And also, I mean, Magnus, how are you doing? You okay?
Yes, I'm very good. We have a
we're not going to
lovely
dad
day
chat.
and lovely morning.
Lovely day, lovely morning. No more dad
Yes.
chat because we got way too much important things to be talking about. So if you are watching this and you don't know who Rich Gray is, don't know where you've been for a significant part of understanding miniature painting, but if you have a spare few seconds, just pause this, go on the Golden Demon Compendium and look at an array of entries from across the years, which I think speak to the depth and breadth of Rich's skills in this world. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on in this discussion, which is going to be quite gritty as we get into kind of competition painting and what that involves and the mentality therein, and certainly with Golden Demon on the horizon, what it takes to perform at that level. So hopefully a lot of very good and interesting thoughts. If you also aren't already, do check out Rich on either his Patreon or richardgraycreations.com. That's the one where you can access not only the community, of which Magnus and I are very much members, but also the raft of tutorials, as well as the YouTube, which is Demon Rich, but spelled in the Games Workshop way on YouTube. So do check Rich out.
I think it depends which way the Games Workshop way is, because I think their Golden Demon doesn't have an A in.
Their Golden Demon does not have an A in for some reason, but their demons do for some reason.
Yeah.
It's okay. This won't be the first time I get in trouble with the law police, so we'll forge on. So I think the most important thing to start off with, which is something that we hear a lot in the context of Golden Demon specifically, is, oh my God, look at how the standard has changed. Look how the standard's improved. And Rich, you've kind of performed throughout all of the years. You know, you have demons stretching across decades now. Like, what's your perspective on that standard shifting? Working with it, like how have you essentially driven yourself to keep performing at what is essentially the top level?
Well, it's mainly more of a personal thing for me. There's a little bit of the ego element where you want to beat other people, which, you know, it's kind of a small element, but you still, you know, it's nice to win and stuff like that. But mainly it's just from like I want to improve what I'm doing, and it's a case of never being satisfied with what I've done, and it's always the next piece is going to have an element on it that I want to improve on. So it's mainly just pushing myself and enjoying the process, really. It's almost like I enjoy the process more than the finished piece, because when I've done a piece, I just put it away and then I don't really look at it again, maybe in passing as it like it's on the shelf or whatever. But, you know, it's actually while I'm painting it that I'm enjoying it.
Because it's almost like here's the potential of what it could be, not necessarily here's
exactly. Well, the potential is actually quite an interesting thing, because you have to compromise the potential when you're coming up to the Golden Demon. You know, when you start looking at the amount of time you have left and thinking, what can I add and what can I take away? So that actually is kind of a negative, but it sort of forces you to fit in what you can within like the time frame, and in a way kind of be creative, but not as fun.
Yeah, because you're essentially going against those, I guess, more rigid structures of here's what a Golden Demon entry must be. Is that, and this might be a wrong perception on my behalf, but in terms of competition, it seems you are primarily focused on Golden Demon. Is it because of that closed format, the prestige and everything around it, and also being limited with time?
Yeah, it's a few things really. One is like I just like Games Workshop. I like the models, and like, you know, I grew up with it, so it's what I enjoy. And I like that scale of model as well. So Golden Demon is more focused towards that scale. If you look at some of the other competitions, so like Monte Sansovino or whatever, there's a much larger focus on like large scale pieces and busts and whatever. And it's kind of, I always think it's a bit funny because my intention is always, if I paint a piece, there's always the option to game with it, but I never do. It's always like at the back of my mind. Oh, it's got multiple uses, so I still want to use the gaming bases. I hate having to put things on plinths because then it's taking away from my option to play with it. Because ultimately, like when I started, I was a gamer but I've always been an artist. But getting into Games Workshop was I loved the models and I wanted to play games with them. So that's always kind of factored into like the process, even though it shouldn't really. But
I like it. It's multi-use. I'd be losing money if I didn't play with this Golden Demon winning piece.
In some ways, though, it can be quite a negative because, especially with the modern entries at Golden Demon now, where everything is almost like a little diorama. So you're creating bases that are stories in themselves, and everything's like on a plinth, and it's all very carefully manufactured to get the focus onto the model, and like I say, the story element to it. Whereas if you're just doing a basic gaming base, well, not necessarily basic, but you're limited by the size if you just stick to the gaming base. You're not going to have quite as big an impact maybe on somebody that spent a year building a massive diorama base for their piece.
Yeah, which is I guess like a lot of the conversation in regards to like if there is a metagame around Golden Demon is this idea of bases. And I know, Magnus, you're like a fan of, you would like gaming base ideally, wouldn't you?
I would like to, or at least that there was some kind of limit to it, so it couldn't get too far out of hand. To me, it has looked like there was kind of a shift that at some point it was on the gaming base and presented on a gaming base. Then it shifted to be a gaming base on top of a plinth that was, or on top of a joint diorama or whatever that was presented. And these days it's more of a model on a scene or vignette or whatever. So it has definitely shifted, but I'm not necessarily saying it should be 50 mil because that was in the box. But yeah, if a 50 mil is in the box, it shouldn't be 100, right? I mean, at least in my opinion. And it looks like kind of they are judging it, and then again, sometimes they aren't. So they are kind of cracking down and sometimes not, depending on the model and depending on whatever is on the scene and everything. So it looks like there is a shift. And I guess Richard has been playing that too, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of tricky. Obviously, you have to sort of play the game if you... Yeah. And there is a way. If you look at somebody like Neil Hollis, he's very good at playing the Golden Demon game. So he's very consistent in his winning. And, there is almost like a process for just purely focusing on Golden Demon. Whereas for me, I will paint things on a model that don't necessarily improve my chances or maybe even hurt them, but it's because I want to paint them on the model. I think, but I'm in a privileged position because I've had a lot of success at Golden Demon, so I don't care as much about only winning the Golden Demon. I paint the model because I want to paint the model, and I think that's kind of the more important aspect. And it's also important to remember that Golden Demon is just one competition amongst others. And you could enter Golden Demon and do really well and take that same model to another competition and get nothing. And, vice versa can be true as well. So I think the problem with Golden Demon is because it's so well known, and some of the other competitions are more purely for painters, really. So there's a lot of amazing painters in the world, but you could ask somebody else, like the general public, and they'll have no idea, but they'll know what Golden Demon is. So if someone's got a substantial number of Golden Demons, people think they're the best painter, but it doesn't really work like that. It just means that they're the best, or they've done very well at hitting the right marks for Golden Demon. So don't get too hung up. You can even be like, some people don't even enter competitions and they're amazing painters. So I don't think it's a very good metric for how good you are at being an artist necessarily, or even at all. But it just means that you're good at entering Golden Demon, because I do think that Golden Demon, especially historically, has had certain aspects to it that are more rewarded than other competitions.
It is like, it comes into that metagame question again. Like, what's trending at the moment? Is it non-meta at the moment? Is it like really well rendered TMM?
That's kind of interesting because I do it like when you used to win a trophy at Golden Demon, you were invited to a winners' day, and I remember that they had us all in like having us a little group of people, and they were giving a presentation. They were talking about winning at Golden Demon and what they were looking for and things, and they were like, you don't have to do things like non-metallic metal. You don't have to do elaborate freehands. And I swear he looked right at me when I said that.
Well, you don't have to, but...
So it is kind of a misconception that you have to do non-metallics. And I hate the way when people talk about non-metallics and in a negative tone saying like, oh, you're just trying to show off. It's like, yeah, because I enjoy painting non-metallics. It's a painter's thing. I suppose if you're a gamer, you don't really understand why anyone would ever do non-metallics, which is fair enough because you want like a good-looking piece done as quickly as possible, and then kind of like the overall army look is good, and you can do like passable non-metallics very, very quickly as well. Whereas to get something good with non-metallics, it takes a bit of effort, and to know what you're doing. Whereas you could do like a layer of metallic paint and then wash over it, and it'll look all right. So I can understand that people don't necessarily like it, but it is it's a fun thing to like. If you enjoy painting, it's a fun thing to do. So I really dislike when people like talk it down just because they don't like it or necessarily understand it.
Yeah. It's almost like it's kind of at least for me, it's kind of like a puzzle that because you have a main angle and you want that to work, and that you can actually do pretty quickly, right? You paint it in and it is a bit dramatic or whatever, but it really works. But then the puzzle is to make it work as a full piece, right? Because you're not only viewing it from one specific angle in that one picture on Instagram. And that's where, at least for me, the real time consumption is to make it work in every angle or every setting. Yeah.
But it's also kind of interesting as well because sometimes to make it work from the or to get the primary highlight in, Games Workshop will have sculpted, say, like the weapon or whatever, and it'll be angled very poorly for non-metallics.
Every time, dude.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, how am I going to make that work? Usually it's a case of cutting off the hand and rotating it so the weapon's facing the right angle for you.
Yes.
Get that open pose.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, it's interesting, obviously, like from our vantage point in our community now, because it is predominantly, I would say, a lot of display and competition painters where non-met is the standard and it doesn't necessarily have the same like fear, or it's almost like the expectation of, oh, this is going into competition, you're probably painting non-met. And it's actually when someone's like, oh, I'm doing this TMM, that people are like, what? How do you do that? That. I think when you, like in my own... in like slightly informal research when I've shown people like, hey, this is a Dante that's in TMM, this is a Dante in non-met, like whether it's yours or Magnus's, like people definitely appreciate the non-met more because it is artistic, it is dramatic, it has a lot of intentionality to it. I think I was going to say, I think especially for something like Dante, because he's all gold, like he's just like a gold thing, it's actually very hard to make him look interesting in true metallics, because he's just shiny all over. And I don't think I've actually seen a metallic one that looks actually as interesting as a non-metallic one, because you can, on the non-metallic one, you can actually see all the painting on it, where when you look at the metallic one, it's just a shine. Just how there's under a lot of lights, it's glowing. The more you try to display it for a nice photo or whatever, the worse it looks.
Isn't that another thing about the non-meds? It just doesn't photo that well. Oh, sorry, the metallics. They don't photo as well. So if you want something to be displayed on socials, which is most of the time actually, non-meds just look better.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. And there are lots of tricks as well with non-metallics where, depending on how you take the photo, you can do very quick, rough sort of non-metallics. And with a like if you have it slightly out of focus or whatever, I can always tell when somebody's been tricky with their non-metallics. It's mostly pro painters because they know what they're doing. Because if you get the light position and the light volumes correct, even like very, very roughly, it'll look good if it's like tiny bit out of focus, and suddenly it looks like perfectly blended or whatever. And then you'll see it in the flesh. You're like, well, this has like got 3 brush strokes on it.
Yeah.
They are. First top tip is just take photos out of focus and everything looks really well blended.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it is almost like the photo of a model is a separate piece of art on its own compared to the model. And so it's like Instagram has become an art deposit of photos, not of models. And it's quite an important distinction as well, because you can paint for a photo. Something I also found interesting was, people always talk about things like Crystal Brush and how amazing it was, and it's kind of like it's a bit overrated. I did go to like Crystal Brush towards the end of its, sort of before it was cancelled, and it actually was a big letdown to me for the overall quality and just the number of entries and things. It was. It was pretty poor. But one thing I did find out was that some of the winners and things, they weren't even painted at the back.
I mean, if you don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're just looking at them as display pieces from one angle, and then it was, they had the whole photograph thing to go on the Cool Mini or Not website as well. So it was like, okay, it's a very different experience to what I was actually expecting when I see it. Because everyone always judges competitions based on the photos, which is kind of like, it's a horrible way. It's actually one of the biggest problems with Golden Demon is, because every year after a Golden Demon, all the YouTube channels will get all the Golden Demon winners with all the photos from the Games Workshop website, and none of the photos really look like the models, because I don't know exactly what the process is that Games Workshop uses for the photos, but it felt like last time the photos all look very similar in whatever the process was. I'm assuming they just use JPEGs straight from the camera for speed, because they have a lot to get through. But the problem is it has a certain process, like post-processing from the image. So there's a lot of photos that look so bright. Like if you look for the white, like they're overexposed, so the white bleeds out into the background. Like it looks like parts of the models are missing. So it's impossible to look at those photos and say what's good and what's not, because you don't even know what the models look like. And because everything is sort of like homogenized with each photo, like all the settings are to make all the models look the same, you can't really judge the quality of the painting on each one either.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like it was eye-opening for me being at Spiel. It's like my first Golden Demon to be like, oh, so because I mean earlier in the year we'd, as part of your community, there'd been like almost like an ongoing narrative in terms of like, oh, here are the pictures coming back from Adepticon. Here's what things are like, and then there's always like the build-up and then the post-Adepticon drama, and then you go on site and you're like, oh, this is very different, not even just in terms of the vibes, but also the models, like understanding what placed and why. It's why I personally struggle a lot with the narrative. Like I'm sure the YouTube engagement for the Golden Demon drama is high, but it's always a bit depressing to watch. It's just like, oh, should this have won? Well, shut up. You weren't there. Don't worry about it, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I will never say what I think shouldn't have won, because I think that's really disrespectful. So I won't discuss like the top 3 in each category or whatever and say that should or shouldn't have won, because it's just not fair on the artists. And ultimately, it's down to Games Workshop what should and shouldn't win. And we can all have opinions, but our opinions don't count because we're not the Golden Demon judges.
We're not the judges, yeah.
No, we might be qualified as judges, but the Games Workshop will have their own preferences, and it's going to be true for every competition. There always going to be there's a certain amount of subjectivity to the results anyway, and it will just depend on who's judging what at the time to what the results could be. And you could take even if you kept the same judges on a different day, the results could be different. So it's very hard to be like 100% that should win and that shouldn't.
Yeah, that's it's the term that we kind of hate to use in terms of like the subjectivity of the art, but at a certain high level, they're going to be opinions, and that's okay. Like, if you're here to find the objectively best piece, good luck, because you'll be there for an awful long time. Like, just in terms of the levels,
it is very tricky as well, because I do hate when people start saying, "Oh, it's all subjective," because there are objective differences in quality and skill.
Yes.
It'd be like, well, give this little 10-year-old kid a model and paint off, and then there's a 30-year veteran that's won like 10 Slayer swords. Tell me that there's not an objective difference between the quality of the painting, and anyone can look at it and say that's objectively better. So there clearly are things that are good and things that aren't as good. But there is also, I mean, especially with the Golden Demon competition, you also have the lore element, which is very important within the competition. You could have an amazing piece and the lore could be completely wrong and you'll get nothing for it. And that's when people start saying, "Oh, Golden Demon's rubbish. They don't know what they're doing." And it's like, well, no, it's the artist that doesn't know what they're doing, because they're really skilled as an artist, but they're actually rubbish at knowing about Golden Demon. So
it's a marketing exercise for Games Workshop. You have to be in line with the IP and the lore, otherwise they're not going to reward it. It's that simple.
I always view it. So when I did my illustration degree, they were asking us what the difference is between illustration and art. And the general understanding is that if you do something illustrative, you're given a brief. So you kind of like have a box to work in. And you can be as creative as you want within that box. With art, you create your own story, whatever it is. You're completely free to do what you want. But it can be almost more creative to work within those constraints, but you do have to fulfill the brief, which is kind of how I view Golden Demon. You have a brief, you have to hit it, almost like a job.
Yeah, we've just talked about it because the whole rules update and everything, and people were scared about bases because no one really knows what is going on, especially from the wording. And of course we got to talk about it, and it was kind of the same where we knew, is it limiting creativity really? I mean, in the sense that you have to be more creative if they put a limit on you. So are we arguing that we want more or less creativity? Is that really what this is about? Or is it about, a preference to a size or being freer or whatever, right? So
Oh, because there's also going to be biases involved in those discussions as well. So certain people will be amazing at spending a long time on a model and not want to do anything on the base, or like just have the base as a secondary thought. And so they'll be like, well, I don't want the bases to be complex at all.
Yes,
I just want like I mean, that's kind of I fall more towards that element because of the sort of the gaming element again that I talked about earlier. But I do like a nice presented base. But at the same time, other people who may not have like the extreme rendering skills to focus on one model really like to the maximum, but they could tell a nice story within a diorama setting or whatever, and they were like, well, I want a massive base and I can kind of hide the paint quality within the story element. So there's bias within everything.
And that's the thing that I think we try and bed down a lot is like there's nothing true about an intrinsically fair competition. It's just there's always going to be things in the background that you either have to play into or account for, or like it's a hope that like, oh yes, it's going to be 100% fair. No, that's a lunatic thing to say, and you'll never have that. And if you always think that, you'll probably always be quite sad. You've kind of preempted a little bit of this question, Rich, in terms of like when you're looking at, okay, here's the model I want to paint, here's my next Golden Demon piece. You said before that it's like, okay, number one is you have to like it has to be cool, like you have to want to paint it. Is that like the primacy? You're not considering, I think because we deal with a lot of people who are like, hey, I'm going to enter this category because less people will enter it, therefore my chances are better. I take it from your perspective, it's just, no, I need the model to be in line. Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, if I'm going to put a few hundred hours into a model, I want to like it. It's purely a selfish perspective for that. Like, I want to enjoy what I'm doing. If you're purely a trophy hunter, then yes, the choice of model is really important. And but for me, like I just look at what's coming out all the time, and it's actually one of my biggest failings when it comes to model painting is I just get excited constantly about new stuff coming out. So I'll be like, oh, so I've started painting that, but oh, that looks really nice, and I'm constantly my eyes are wandering onto other things. So it's really hard to focus like that, and I do actually think probably doing it as a job has made it worse for me because I'm constantly like, oh, another thing to do in the production line. Whereas if I was just doing it as a hobby, I'd be like, right, so there's the army that I really like. That's what I'll focus on. I'll paint that. And I'd probably have like a really nice looking army by now. But yeah, so it is the focus thing for me, especially, is quite hard to do. And like the backs of models, everyone it's a joke. Everyone's like the backs of models. But it's like no one cares from from learning to paint or whatever when they're looking at the models. Like you'll get zero engagement for just posting the back of a model on Instagram, and it's not really helpful, and no one enjoys painting it that much. And then when you've got constant new stuff coming out, so it's like, so do I spend another couple of weeks painting the back of that, or do I go like paint the cool new thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wondered, is it so you maybe paint on a model for a while and then to a certain standard, and then a new thing comes up and you paint on that to a certain standard, and a new thing and a new thing. Then at some point you kind of choose to finish some things for competition, for example. Do you find it hard to go back when you've kind of gone through other stuff in between?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is very hard to go back. It's hard to then keep producing content as well. Like I'm painting like the back of my Dark Reaper at the minute. I've got like you're painting the backs of the knees or whatever. It's like, well, okay, I just spent a couple of days painting that small section that's really not interesting to anyone. Yeah. I actually don't mind it too much, but everyone's seen the model now. They want to see something else. So it's like the content is not coming while I'm doing that, and it becomes a bit tricky just to keep doing your job as such. Well, but at the same time, people expect you to go to competitions as well. Like I enjoy going to the competitions, to like meeting people, and it's a bit of fun. Like Golden Demon is like a fun competition. It's probably best to not take it too seriously because you're gonna have a bad time. Well, it can be tricky, but people get really, really wrapped up in it, and you have to remember you're putting a lot of yourself into a model when you paint it.
Yeah.
So if you've put like hundreds of hours into something, and it doesn't get even looked at by the judges, then you're going to have a negative reaction.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like how you deal with that at the time. I think you have to be a little bit careful as well. Social media can be very harsh on you. If you're a very emotional person and you go to social media about the result, and the result could have been really bad. Like, I mean, the quality of the result, like how they judge it or whatever, they might just not have done a good job, which can happen in any competition. And you could be really upset about that. But the audience that views your reaction doesn't understand any of this. They don't understand the context. All they see is you're a sore loser.
Yes.
Well, either that or they are very much on your side, because when you post something, it's for your following, mostly at least, which means you kind of get two camps. At least in my opinion, it looks like you kind of get two camps, right? You have either people who are very much on your side and that is unfair, or you should have gotten, and what happened and whatever. And then you have the other side who's like, yeah, but look at the pictures. It also has a dot there or whatever, right? So it's not really fair.
The opinions become quite extreme. It's never a case of maybe not, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like, no, that was amazing, no, that was really bad. So and both camps really don't know what they're talking about.
Yes.
It's actually quite a small number of people. so we talked about the photos for the judging for a start. So that's what most people see. But then you have the actual competition itself when you turn up, and then depending on the quality of the lighting in the cabinets or like just being able to see it, it's really only like if you go and get to see the model out of the cabinets that you really understand what they look like. So yeah, it's kind of interesting the results and things, but it, as I was saying, it can be hard to deal with the results, and it's especially hard if you are somebody that is known on social media, because there are expectations placed upon you. There are people that want you to fail. There are people that want you to succeed, and the way that you handle that it can be quite difficult. So obviously I've been doing it for a long time, so I'm more aware of the whole situation. And I don't mind too much. Like on the day I can be upset or whatever, which I think is a very natural response. And anyone that is coming down hard on somebody that's lost a competition after they've put so much time and effort into a piece, they're not human. They have no empathy for understanding that position. But at the same time, you've got to deal with that. And, after a day or whatever, it means nothing. It's just like, whatever. It's just competition on to the next thing. So, yeah, it's all of it there's so many facets to competition painting and the results and everything involved with it.
Has the atmosphere changed over the introduction of social media? Because you've kind of been painting throughout, and Instagram is like a behemoth it is, and God, I now get painting TikToks and things like that. Is the conversation around the competitions different because of it, and worse or better?
I think, I don't know, within the painting community itself, there's always been drama at Golden Demon. And I think, when it was the heavy metal team that was judging at Golden Demon, there were still people that weren't happy with the results or whatever. And some of that will be down to ego. But there are, I think nearly every competition that I've been to, I would have had different choices from my perspective in certain categories. But I also knew at the time that whoever was judging could justify their choices. So it doesn't matter too much. It just depends on whether you're at the wrong end of the bad end of the stick when it comes to the results. I think with the way it's gone, but the problem is, while it was earlier on in the competition, there weren't really pro painters. There were people that would enter Golden Demon consistently and they would get very good at it. But now painting models is a business as well. So your income is dependent on it, and there are a lot more stakes. But at the same time, the level of professionalism is massively increased. And the problem now is you have people entering competitions that are basically more qualified than the judges for knowing what we're looking at. I think that creates more of a problem, because when, if I come along and say this and this should have won, which are, like I say, I won't ever do that. But you start saying things that should have won or things that shouldn't have won, which is the really bad thing. Then that carries weight, and then if then people aren't happy with who the judges are, then that's even more of an issue. And I think that then it just makes the argument get a bit more aggressive. Everything just becomes more. So before Golden Demon, it was there was a bit of drama on the day or whatever. No one would even hear about it. It's just about between the painters, between ourselves, and if we thought something was right or not. Now everybody has an opinion, and it becomes more toxic due to that.
And you've got to be in a camp too. It's not just the opinion exists. You have to be either for or against it. You can't just be what the hell is going on kind of thing.
I mean, I try to stay back from a lot of these things. It can be tricky because as a more well-known painter, people want to know your opinion.
Yes.
Which can be tricky, and so, especially if you don't care, if it's something that you're not particularly bothered about, and then you have to kind of force yourself to have a look at it and think, well, okay, maybe that one was better or whatever. But I think it would be nice if people could just be a bit more chill about the competition in general, and just accept it for what it is, and just be like, it's a celebration of model painting. It's a little bit of fun, and not to put so much emphasis on it, and not to just be like so militant about it. It almost gets to, in some stages, like it's more important than politics, when people get so wound up about what should and shouldn't win. So it's one thing. It's one thing for the artist to be unhappy about something, which is fair enough. It's another thing when you've got like thousands of people saying what shouldn't have won and becoming very like angry about it. So, well, it's not that important.
yeah. The world hasn't ended. It's fine.
Yeah.
No one's died. We just looked at some minis for a weekend, and that was fine. I want to jump back on something you said previously about sometimes you paint stuff that you think is like no one looks at or is under it, like can harm your chances in gold. Can you give an example? I'm really curious about like what that might be.
So say like on the Autark, when I painted that, what I ended up doing, it was because I was painting such tiny details, like subtle details, reflections and things like that on it. I was taking photos and then looking at the photos for how to improve it because I couldn't see it on the model.
Yeah.
So and it's like ultimately that's stupid, because if I can't see it, then with my headset on looking at it, then the judges can't see it either.
No.
But you can see it in the photo. So it's sort of like, okay, you got these really massively blown up images, nice and zoomed in on Instagram, but it's taking so long to do that, and I don't think it's necessarily useful. I mean, it is kind of useful in a way because it's still pushing your brush control. So you then have so much control over what you can do afterwards. And it also translates to being quicker and more precise with your painting. So you can actually paint quite quickly to a high standard with exact brush marks. That's quite nice. But in terms of the competition, but I had a reason for that, and that traditionally the finish and quality on the model was like one of, if not the most important parts of Golden Demon.
Yeah.
And you can see things that win that maybe weren't as exciting to look at, especially in photographs, exciting to look at, but they still get gold or whatever. And so I was like, well, I kind of enjoy the refinement process, which is it's a bad combination to enjoy it and like just try and push it to for no reason for the competition. But so we don't actually know what the judges exactly look for, and in some cases when we find it quite hard to understand what the choice is, then we look at the photos. We were like, are they looking at photos as part of the process? And if that's the case, then then actually adding that detail is useful, because you're adding things that, it's actually very hard to get to that level. It takes a lot of time and effort to be able to do. So these like ultra micro little refinements and things, would that actually improve your chances with the result? But the problem is you still have to get to that fine close-up judging stage, and there's different process, different qualities as such for getting through those different steps to get to the top three. And one of the most important ones for the early stages is just the impact from a distance. And I don't think it's even the judges that do the first stage cut. It's almost like it has to look good to the general public, because and it's kind of, it seems bad to separate it out from the general public and professional painters for looking at a model for judging the quality. But when you're a pro painter, you understand a lot more what it is that you're looking at, so that there are things on there that people will miss. Whereas the general public will have a much more instant impact for things like high contrast, high saturation, just like does it pop out instantly when you see it, which it makes it actually kind of a tough combination, where you want to be doing something really subtle, but to get to the high level judging stage in the competition. You need to still have the impact at the beginning, and you kind of like when you want subtlety, then the high impact actually fights against that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where the gaming of the system comes in a little bit, and you're just hitting these little check marks to see if you get through. And one of the funny thing is, because of the way that works, is people start saying, "Oh, the judges only pick heavy metal style painting because it's very easy to see these elements on them." So you'll have like the high impact or like how clean it is and stuff like that. And they also think, oh, it's Games Workshop just wanting to sell their style, and it's just not true. And like Essen actually represented really well the number of extremely like amazing pieces that didn't get anything, that were sort of heavy metal in style, or kind of like, we call it heavy metal.
Jason.
Yeah. So it's like they've got heavy metal with like additions, like sprinkles on top, because it's
heavy metal
like,
plus.
you know,
It's fine.
Yeah, they're amazing to see. They don't always stand out that much in photos, but if you see some of these things in hand, you'll be blown away on just the skill required to do that.
Yeah.
And some of those pieces, they got nothing at Essen. And I mean, that was one of the things that I was less happy about from that competition. But if you looked at what people were talking about, there were other pieces that were very strongly heavy metal style that did well, and people were like, look, there's proof they're picking heavy metal style stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, but you haven't seen what hasn't won, so you don't understand that they actually haven't done that. But just because, you know, so
because you're not there, you don't get the full context. You're just
you only see the
headline.
photos.
Yeah. I mean, kind of interesting is that there were heavy metal and ex-heavy metal members that didn't get anything. So
Yeah.
It is. I've never thought about it that way, in the context of like almost having a first level pass, which is, would this look good to your average person? And then, but it makes sense in terms of the context of it as like a marketing event for Games Workshop. You know, I can show like 2 minis to my wife who is interested but doesn't necessarily study any of this, and it's just like, yeah, they're the same quality, even if they could be dramatically different. So yeah, knowing what kind of appeals to people at a broad level is kind of critical, maybe.
Yeah, it's something I noticed with people that don't know anything about model painting, and you can show them 2 models, and you can have a piece that you spent hundreds of hours on painted in 10 minutes, and they'll pick the piece in 10 minutes because most likely, if you've painted the piece quickly, then you've looked for different aspects to pick out. Whereas if you've got spent hundreds of hours on a piece, there's refinements on there and subtle reflections and all sorts of stuff that unless you look really closely at it. Now, it might be the case if you show them photos of the 2, they'll pick the really complex one. But I remember showing some like a model to one of Rebecca's relatives, and I hadn't finished painting a cloak on it, and he was like, "Oh, the cloak's amazing," and I'd literally just put like flat red on, and it wasn't even like an opaque red. It was like some of it was a bit like you could see some of the primer showing through. So he was like, "Oh, you've painted all the folds and things." I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, I have. Yeah, definitely. That was my skill. What I guess to put this to both of you, because both of you now Rich, you've been doing it a long time in terms of tutoring and mentoring people, and you've got to the point now where I think you've mentored quite a few Golden Demon winners themselves.
Yeah, I've told them all they need to cut a little bit of their trophies off to
and send them to me. Absolutely. Just make sure it's in the will. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
What do you guys both kind of encounter a lot in terms of either like misconceptions or when people are kind of striving for that Golden Demon, that win? What do you run into more often than not? It's a broad question, I appreciate, but you work with people from all levels, so I'd be really curious if it's like, oh, everyone wants to do smooth blends, but they're forgetting about contrast, etc.
Yeah, I think the non-metallics is high on the list of people they think you have to do non-metallics to win.
I think it's the recipe. I think for me, because I'm newer, the fact that what is the recipe to win something? Because at least recently, it looks like there isn't really one. I mean, it would have to photograph well, it would have to be striking, and it would have to be really like clean and easy to read. So if you can kind of put those things into one, well, you're doing good. But is that the full recipe? Well, sometimes it means that you need a bigger or smaller base. Sometimes it means you need more or less contrast. Sometimes it means more or less refinement, or whatever we want to call it. Looking recently, it's really hard to pinpoint this is what you need to do. Then, I mean, you can kind of see this will make you do really well, but but it might not. I mean, it's the truth, right? You can have hundreds of people on that day all painted something that would do really well, and they won't all of them do really well. That's just how that competition is, right? So I think it's, at least from where I stand and the people I talk to, it's there is no recipe, not the one that I can just see and tell.
There's no guaranteed recipe. I think.
No,
That's the thing. One thing I would add to that, which I think has become more important more recently, is the sort of the cool aspect. Does it look cool? Like, and that's very hard to pinpoint. But it could just be like, is it a really interesting sort of story, or like it could be anything. So that's why it's really hard to say. But it's just something about it, like the way it's presented, or like it's just got a cool little feature on it. It could be anything like that, but just sort of catches the judge's eye. And it is also linked to the IP, like the lore element. Like if you can, I think, translate something that's really interesting and unique into your piece that is strongly linked to the lore, I think that would be very helpful. I don't know how, and I think that a lot of painters find that irritating, because the lore element, incorporating that, having a large impact, is not painting. It's the and you don't necessarily have to be an amazing painter to have that cool element, but you could still win going in that direction. And I think that then creates the real inconsistency with the results. So you can have something that's very cool, get a trophy, or something that's very refined with like nothing else on it, like it's just pure technical painting, also get a result. And then you're like, well, which way was I supposed to go? And then there's another piece that's very heavily technical and gets nothing. But that technical piece won, and then you got something that's really cool and gets nothing. And you're like, I don't understand. So that's where people get frustrated.
But isn't one of the exciting things that we actually don't know? Because otherwise it would be chess, it would be solved. We would be looking at someone walking through the door and we would say, well, no one has a chance. I mean, that's not very encouraging for someone like me, for example, because I'm newer to it, right? So I would like some of that.
I know, but I would say at the same time, ultimately you want the best thing to win. And if someone turns up and it's the best thing and it doesn't win because of reasons, that's wrong as well. And like, I do appreciate when people say, oh, it's really nice to get new blood in or whatever, and like it's more exciting. It's like, yeah, but is it better? Did they win because they were better, or was it just because it had some other feature that, like, it caught the judge's eye? So, and then you end up with a situation where people are spending hundreds of hours not getting necessarily the result that you would expect looking at the piece, and then you're like, well, why bother doing that if that but at the same time you should only be doing it if that's what you enjoy. So
that's kind of my point, right? Is that you should paint something that you really like, that you think is cool, that you want to present. Hopefully it does really well, but having it do really well should probably not be the main focus anyways, right? So
but I forgot what I was going to say now.
Sorry.
Well, I think the problem arises where you get somebody that wants a trophy, is just painting something they don't like, but they've put hundreds of hours into it to get a result. They don't get the result, and they're upset with the result, and then that puts them off Golden Demon, because they're like, I did everything I should have done. I painted this model that I didn't like, and I didn't get a result. So what was the point?
Yeah.
When in fact the error was thinking that there was a recipe in the first place. Like,
I mean, like so there is like a sort of recipe, but we don't know exactly. And like, so it could be that you could say, right, I'm going to paint something to the Heavy Metal Plus way. So I'm going to do perfect Heavy Metal Plus. You still might not get anything. So it's and it can be inconsistent between each category. So sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, and all sorts of things like that.
I like, as a takeaway, kind of absorbing the raw amount of knowledge getting pumped into the air, this idea of like almost thinking to yourself, if someone were to see your model, what would be the first thing that they told someone else about it? Which is maybe a good sign if you have something cool. Like, very rarely someone like, oh my God, the blends were just beautiful. Like, that's fine. But it wouldn't be the first thing you say.
No. Whereas if you had like a little battle scene and you've got like a Khorne Berserker tearing someone in half, and they're like, oh, that's cool. But it does depend a little bit on how well you can create that. But the thing is, there are people that are really, really good at doing converting and sculpting and that kind of thing, and they might not be great at painting, but the general public, they like models. That's what it is. They see heavy metal paint scheme or whatever, which is there to show off the model. It's not necessarily the most exciting all the time, but it does its job exactly the way it's supposed to. But then people, they kit bash models, they do these cool like little stories or whatever, and that's what they like. They're like, oh, look at that, that's an amazing story, that hits exactly what the lore wants, so cool, it's nice and gory or whatever. It's like, yeah, but it's not painted very well, because I don't care, that's the best piece. That's
maybe something we see quite a lot in terms of like, oh, what if I kit bash this? What if I do this? It's like, you can do all that, but at the end of the day, it has to be either better than the Games Workshop version, because you're almost asking them to reward not their own work in terms of the winners, and this still has to be painted beautifully. Otherwise, you'll fall flat on. There is no cheat code. Like, maybe that was when I was initially like painting the squad. You think, well, if you paint a squad, everything needs to be really good, but it doesn't have to be the same rendering as like the single figure. When actually, no, it does. You just have to paint more of it to an extremely high standard. There are no easy outs.
No, I mean, squad's an interesting one as well. Like I've won trophies with squad before, but I find squad one of the hardest categories to do, because you have to paint the same thing over and over, and that's not that exciting to me. So I'm always like, all right, I want to do each one as like an individual character, and then you end up with a load of individual characters, and they're not a squad. So you could have like an amazingly painted group of models that aren't linked together really. Are you like, well, that didn't win? It's like, yes, because it's not a unit.
Mindful of time, because we don't just steal you all day, as much as I would like to just keep bringing you questions. So one of the things that Magnus and I were talking about last podcast was this idea of like, if you have a reputation, which you do, you have many golden demons, you have 2 Slayer swords, like, do you feel the weight of that expectation when you're looking at entries and what you're painting? Like, does that factor in? Is it an added pressure that in an ideal world you could do without?
No, I mean, there's pressure from having a following, but I think that is true regardless of your previous success. And I think actually it can be harder for people, like especially like massive YouTubers that haven't won things, but they've got massive followings, and then they can enter and they don't do very well. There's a lot of pressure in that situation. I don't like to compromise too much on, like, you know, I just want to paint what I want to paint. So I don't mind too much. I think sometimes as well, if you have a following, people expect you to paint a certain way. So, you know, like I painted Mortarion, and people, they want me to paint another Mortarion. And I'm like, well...
No, I've completed that.
Yeah, I want to do other things. And also it's very model specific. And it just depends what I'm enjoying at the time to what I want to paint. I really like the Eldari at the moment, so that's what I'm enjoying. But there are definitely other things that I will want to paint as well. I really like the look of those undead that were shown off at the LVO, the vampire on the zombie dragon. I was like,
That is
Yes.
yeah.
nice model.
Yeah, it's much too big for me, but I wish it wasn't, because it is a gorgeous model.
Yeah, I mean that is a problem with the style of painting that I'm doing at the moment, with that sort of more refined, very detailed sort of look, because then you're talking hundreds and hundreds of hours to paint something like that dragon, where actually a looser style would probably be more appropriate for it. And I do think there is space for that in the Golden Demon. A looser style can still win. And it's not just a case of everything is going to be judged under a microscope for how smooth the blends are. And I think that was true at Essen as well. There were pieces that were definitely rougher that were getting trophies. But it's not to say they weren't good. They just had different qualities to the pieces that were ultra refined. So I might try something because I do sometimes find that when I'm doing looser things, you can have a lot of energy, like some interesting marks and a lot of expression stuff that you can very quickly capture in a model, and then you start adding the refinement and you can lose some of that by refining it so much. So I think it would be interesting to try and keep some of that exciting energy from the marks, because it'll have that cool kind of look to it. It's just going to be a case of how much refinement is necessary before they accept it.
So you can almost feel a little bit trapped by your style occasionally, to be like, oh well, I'm known for this hyper refined style. Can I be expressive like this?
I don't know, because I wasn't always hyper refined. It's just something I've become more interested in as I've progressed as a painter. I don't sort of like set one style and be like, that's me. There are some painters I see that just do one thing and they do it over and over, and they just keep getting better and better and better at it, and that's what they do. I get a little bit bored, or like I just be like, oh, I just want to try something else now, so I'll go in a different direction. No, I don't think either's right or wrong or anything like that. It's just what I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
You actually also kind of switch between a bit of quicker painting for, well, tabletop or whatever you want to call it. But yes.
Yeah, you show for my ego.
But you do, but you actually do paint some things that are quicker or less refined from time to time. Whereas, for example, I don't. I only paint the same way, which actually is like kind of trapping me, in the sense that when I say, well, that one is much too big, I mean it. I would never finish it. I would start it and I would enjoy it 60%. Then I would be, oh no, I'm over this one. In the cabinet it goes, never comes out. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what it is that you want to achieve, though. I do think it is handy to have like a range of skills. So if you want to paint something bigger, you can do that. But like I saw that you did your Troggoth. That was like quite a big model to do, and I thought that looked really good. So, but it's still, I could see that your style was still there. Like lots of stippling and refinement and things. So, I don't know if that would work as much on, say, like a zombie dragon, because I think that would be, like, say, it's a massive amount of work to do that.
Yes.
But at the same time, if you also consider the context of the model, so like a zombie dragon with like undead elements to it, it should be sort of like rough and gritty and and that kind of feel to it. So some of the looser marks should look appropriate on it, maybe. But I'm not necessarily looking at that in terms of Golden Demon there. I'm just looking at more of like sort of artistic expression based on like the concept of the model and the lore and stuff that goes with it. So I think the more that I paint and the more that I progress along my painting journey, the less I sort of am focused on Golden Demon as purely just painting for Golden Demon. And it is a case that a lot of the time now when Golden Demon comes up, I say, right, what model have I got that's close enough to be finished that I can do for the competition? Which is not the ideal way, especially with how much people are focusing on Golden Demon to win trophies now. And you've got people that will spend, like, they'll just do one model a year or whatever, like for the competition. That's it. They'll plan it out very meticulously, and that's it all the way. And unless you're willing to go to those extremes, you can't really compete at that, doing that thing. So I don't necessarily know if that's healthy for the competition, though, because that really does separate the level or the number of people that can put that time and focus into one model. And even if like just having to enjoy painting to that just one model for a year, when you like, for me, I just that wouldn't be fun, because I'd be like, there's so much cool stuff, and okay, it can be very satisfying at the end to have this piece that has, like, you know, untold numbers of hours and looks amazing, but it's still time. It's like, I could have been painting all these other things at the same time. So
I could have 10 cool models, not just one cool.
So I like it's not wrong to paint like that. It's like that's a perfectly valid way to paint, and it should be rewarded. But at the same time, if that's what you're going to go for, then what is going to compete with that unless you put in that same time? And it does very much, it's almost like, you know, the pro athlete thing, like if you want to be an Olympian or whatever, then that's it, that's your focus.
What you do.
That's what you do. You paint for Golden Demon with that model or whatever. Whereas for me, I just want to paint models. I want to paint them to a high standard. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy painting models to a high standard. But I don't necessarily just want to paint one model.
Obviously.
Yes. So I guess final question from me before we begin to wrap up, which is, I think when I've been, you know, being part of your community, seeing the way that you comment on, you know, all the people like, hey, here's what I'm painting, there's definitely a sense of passion I get from you in terms of like just loving the field and the hobby. Is there anything like outside of your own work that's inspired you recently in terms of like, oh, this is cool as hell, like I'm excited? Is it more the models? Is it a paint job you've seen? Is it something that's kind of got those synapses firing?
I don't think specifically. I get inspired just like visually by so many things, you know, like just like artwork, general artwork, like historically artwork as well, or historical artwork. But like films are a big impact, although I find that modern films are maybe not quite as exciting as they used to be. I don't know, they seem, although you got like things like, I don't know, so like Dune or whatever, that's visually amazing. So that kind of thing can be very useful. It can be tricky as well, though, because when you're looking at 2D art, to translate that into 3D, you lose the empty space. So like, you know, it's almost like if you look at Hollywood posters or whatever, they'll have like, there's a whole color on the whole thing. Like, so you have like the color composition, it's always like blue and orange or whatever, like horrible
orange and teal, baby, like, get those on the posters, we're good.
But like the whole thing is working, whereas you have the model and that you don't get any of the light around it. Like there's no framing of that. So when you look at a 2D artwork, it is a 2D artwork for the whole thing. And so what people are trying to do is use backdrops to fill that space. And I'm not sure on the popularity of, because that is actually one thing that is becoming more and more popular, and people think, oh, backdrops are the way to go. And I'm not, like, backdrops can be very good, especially for display pieces, like from one angle. But one thing I really don't like is when people will copy a 2D piece and then just have the backdrop, and it's done by an artist that's already painted it. Is that you're copying and then replicating it, but you're just copying the backdrop. And I really don't like that, because you haven't created it. And it is something that I would always mark down in the competition, is copying, because the creative element is really important in an art competition. So if you're just doing like 2D backdrops that's a copy of like a codex cover or whatever, and you've replicated the model in the front, all the hard work has been done for you. You can replicate it really well, but you haven't created that. So yeah, that's a negative thing for me. But like we were saying, for positives, so
but
this
the
is
inverse
Yeah, but you get
true,
the framing. Yeah.
but creativity then is the thing that you know, I guess it's when you're like scrolling through Instagram, it's like, shit, I've not seen that interpretation before. I've not.
Yeah,
this
so
color choice is really interesting.
Those are sort of things that excite me, is when someone comes up with a new way of looking at it, or like just looks interesting. It doesn't even like, you don't have to look at pro painters' work. I think this is the important thing. You can look at like people that are just starting out or whatever, and sometimes it's better to look at them because they don't already have all these preconceived ideas of what, like there's no baggage to their viewpoint necessarily. So they can be like, well, this might be cool. Like, it could be really weird and be like, why have they done that? But actually, I quite like it. So, and then you can steal their ideas and you think,
nothing original anymore. Come on, we just steal it. Right. So, keen to close off. 63 days to Adepticon. How ready are you feeling?
about 0. I was going to get Fulgrim done for it, but I was looking at him, and he is such a difficult model to paint. And I remember when it was first shown by Forge World, and I asked one of the guys that worked there how long it took the guy to paint it, and it was a ridiculous amount of time. And I remember thinking, I could have done that in a quarter of the time. What the heck?
What a noob.
Yeah. And then I started working on it, and then I thought, right, I can actually do this for Golden Demon, because it's a beautiful model. It's one of my favorite models. It's so nice, but it is hard work, that model. The amount of just it's just excessive detail, which fits Fulgrim. Like it's like I say, it's such a good sculpt, but it's hard. Like, resin in general anyway is harder to paint than plastic, and you don't necessarily understand when you look at it and you think, oh, that it looks cool, but the surface material is so different. The edges are sharper in resin. The detail it can have, like, the filigree can have like little undercuts that go around it. So like when you see a little filigree thing on a shoulder pad or whatever, you think, oh, that's no different to painting it on plastic. But no, the plastic will be perfectly smooth, flat, will join flat to the shoulder pad. You think, oh, so that's easy to paint. The filigree on the resin, it'll be like a little sausage-shaped tube, and it sort of undercuts around it, and it's not perfectly smooth. There are little, I don't want to call them faults, but there are little like variations in the surface. Even the smooth, flat surfaces on resin are not smooth and flat like plastic is. Yeah. So there's just so much to fix, and it is more of a case, like if you're doing like a large bust or whatever, that's not so much of an issue. But if you're doing something that's a Games Workshop scale, I don't believe they actually work to a scale. But if you're using a Games Workshop scale piece, it means it becomes excessive, because it's so much detail cramped in to make it fit the scale of the whole setting. So yeah, he is a problem for me, because I've got kind of like lots of plans for the wings with freehand. So I was talking about Mortarion, but I'm not going to do in the same way as Mortarion, because his wings was like the main feature, whereas for Fulgrim, Fulgrim is the focus on it. But I still wanted to do some freehand because I enjoy painting freehand. So I was like, right, I've got these plans for the wings, but it's so much harder to do on the resin model that I don't think I have time to do all the things that I want to it. But now, normally for a Golden Demon coming up, as we were talking about earlier, you start thinking, what can I get done in the time? Yeah. But I don't want to compromise on the model. So
yeah,
I'm like, he's going to be done when he's ready, and I'm just going to do other things, I think. So like I said, I'm doing my Dark Reaper, and that's going to be a unit, and I've stepped back a little bit from the refinement and all the different reflections and things that I've done on the Autarch. I guess I couldn't do that for a unit anyway, it's too much. But it's still, it looks quite nice, and he's got his nice little freehand face that I've done on him and stuff, and so I'll just have to do the same for the Exarch and the other model for a 3-man unit, and I think that should look all right. as a Golden Demon entry. You know, we'll see what the judges think, but I think they should look all right. And then I'm going to see what else I can do. I should have some time to get something else finished as well. I am painting something, but I'm not allowed to show it yet because it's still not released. But I might. We'll see how that goes, because I've done some work on that to do some freehand on it as well. I'm thinking I want to do more freehand. I've missed doing that a little bit.
I like hearing the excitement when you're talking about it. But I think the most exciting thing you've said there is Fulgrim's going to be done when Fulgrim's done. Which I think when we first saw the first whip of Fulgrim, I was like, "Fuck, this looks a bit special." And yeah, I really hope you just take your time when that thing eventually comes out. It's going to be sick. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Fingers crossed. I have all the faith. That then brings us to time. Rich, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. If you're not following Rich, what the hell are you doing with your life? Go do that. Go check out the website. Go check out the Patreon. Also, Rich is running the Rot Spot competition currently. We're painting Nurgle. You have the choice of Lord of Plagues or the Champion of Nurgle from the 40k set. I think I've got that right. Sassy Nurgling. That's all you need to know.
That's all you need, yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else people need to know about you, Rich? Anything you're doing? Anything you're excited to tell folks about?
No. Well, not that I could talk about anyway.
Yeah, entirely fair. Perfect. Just keep following him, and news will be released when news is released. But for now, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. And until next time, keep painting and paint something beautiful. Goodbye.